We are your home theater and AV questions answered. This is AVRant. Want your home theater or AV question answered by Tom and Rob? Send it to question@avrant.com. Welcome to another edition of AVRant. I'm Tom Antry, and I'm here with
Rob H. This is AVRant. It's your home theater and AV questions answered. We have no new remotes this week, no new projectors this week in the news, but we do have some Sound United news. It's not the news you want, but we have some.
That's right.
I'll warn you right now, it's not the news you want.
I can't tell you how underwhelmed I am by this. I gotta be I mean, it's like.
I mean, I guess it's a net positive that it exists.
Well, that's the way I feel about it too.
Sure.
It's a net positive.
Yeah.
It's not a terrible thing. I mean, it's not even not that terrible. I mean, it's just
it's not a negative.
It's like it just ekes it over like if you take the pros and the cons, you weigh them out. You're like,
sure.
Yeah, I guess it's in the plus column.
That's
but
right.
It's just barely there. So. Yes, we'll be talking about that in a second.
We shall.
This is AVRant, the podcast that answers your home theater and AV questions. To get your questions answered, all you have to do is ask. You ask by emailing us at question@avrant.com. Go to avrant.com, leave us a comment, facebook.com/avrantpodcast, youtube.com/avrant. Contact Rob directly, rob@avrant.com. His Twitter's at firstreflect. I'm Tom at avrant.com. My Twitter's at avrant_Tom.
That's it.
Okay, it's going to thank our listeners of the week to start off with. So to become a listener of the week, you have to support the podcast in some way. One of the ways you do that is going to avrant.com, click on the Buy Us a Cup of Coffee link, and leave us a PayPal donation. So we want to thank Mike and Jonathan for doing that this week. Thank you very much, Mike, and thank you very much, Jonathan.
Yeah, it's really nice. Mike and Jonathan, thank you both so much for the PayPal donations. Very much appreciate the financial support.
We also want to thank our 133 patrons over at patreon.com. Patreon's a service where you sign up to become a contributing, supporting member of our podcast listening community.
All right.
Anyways, 133 of them so far. Minimum of $1 a month comes out of their accounts and comes to us going forward until they change their minds. It takes us off. So we thank our 133 patrons, including Rafael and Bertrand.
That is right. Patreon.com/AVRant podcast is the place to go to sign up for an automatic monthly donation. If you'd like to financially support us that way, Rafael and Bertrand, thank you very much for being two of our 133 patrons.
That's right. If you can't support us financially, find some other way to support us and either tell us what you did or whatever. We'll figure it out. Anyways, Infinite Gary sent us a digital copy code for the movie Elysium. Mm-hmm. And we got some notes of gratitude for keeping the podcast going during our ongoing pandemic from Dave Dazz, who says the next time I'm in Atlanta, Georgia, I'm welcome to visit his theater to enjoy some barbecue. Jonathan with the CEDIA that's being rebuilt, and it was Hurricane Ida that flooded his place in New Jersey. He's a long-distance Seahawks fan.
Yeah.
Rafael Fred says he's been listening for 3 years, and Bertrand. So that is Dave, Dazz, Jonathan, Rafael. Yeah, I feel like there should be an R in there someplace. Anyway, Rafael, Fred, and Bertrand. So thank you very much.
Yes, I'll repeat the names. First of all, Infinite Gary, thank you very much for that digital copy code for the movie Elysium. I still hate the name digital copy, but I mean that's what they're referred to, so I gotta go with the name. All of our discs are digital. What are they, analog? Are Blu-rays analog? No, but whatever. Dave, Dazz, Jonathan, Rafael, Fred, and Bertrand, thank you all very much for the notes of gratitude and encouragement. They are very much appreciated, and thank you to everybody who continues to listen and send in your questions. And Tom's camera is frozen. I was like, is he just closing his eyes for a really long time? Nope. Frozen camera.
Oh.
It's gotta happen.
I guess it's the thing. Hi, Mike.
Yup.
In the news, Sound United, as we teased at the top of here, has made a big announcement.
Huge.
It's huge announcement. So excited. Everybody got on the edge of their seats. And then, much like an anime, they immediately fell face first with their legs and butt up in the air, which is what happens in anime. So they have announced that Denon and Marantz are going to get an HDMI switcher. They call it a switcher.
Yeah. We were like, hey, we're getting kind of close to the October timeframe when all the rumors were saying there might be new Denon and Marantz AV receiver models. And then we're like, oh, Denon and Marantz press release. It's an HDMI switch.
Right.
3 in, 1 out.
Very
HDMI 2.1. That's the news. It's an HDMI 2.1
That is the news.
switch. Yeah.
Okay, so if you go, there's a couple things there. If you go to like Amazon and look for an HDMI 2.1 switch that has similar capabilities as to what this has, so this is 3 in, 1 out.
That's right.
It's called the AVS-3 from Denon, and it's the VS3003 or 3003 from Marantz. But it's the same thing.
It's the same thing.
It's got 40 gigabits per second bandwidth. It's got, they call it 8K anyways, but it's got 4K 120 or 8K 60 capabilities. It's HDR compatible, of course. I mean, HDMI CEC compatible, all of that stuff. So it's meant to expand the HDMI 2.1 input capabilities of all the 2020 8K models that only had a single 2.1 port. And it can take the place of the SPK618, which is that adapter that they released that they'll give you for free that's one in, one out.
Yeah.
So anyways, there won't be an HDMI. You don't have to get that and also get this. You can just get this.
I had visions of, like, you've got one of the older Denon Marantz models that didn't have the updated HDMI board already built into it. So you needed the SPK618 adapter to get all the VRR and 4K 120 stuff working, at least from an Xbox Series X or the NVIDIA GPUs. So it's like, okay, so you got that, the 1 in, 1 out plugged into your AV receiver, and then I'm like, then do you plug this 3 in, 1 out switch into the SPK618 and create yourself an HDMI centipede? But no, that is not how that is going. This takes the place of the SPK618 if you've got one of the older models that needs it. And on the screen, I'm showing a complete list of all the models that this applies to, and if you remember, the 2020 models. That's what it is.
Yeah, it's all the 2020 models. The ones that got the SPK618 or whatever they're calling for Marantz. I think they're calling it the same thing for both of them. Yeah. All those that were compatible, that needed this to get the full, everything working on HDMI 2.1 is compatible with this. Plus, the flagship receiver and processor that you will have to. Hi, Mike. You will have to get the upgrade first, though. It doesn't seem to work unless you get the upgrade. So you need to get the upgrade.
Well, because so originally when there was the AVR 8500H, X8500H, when that first came out, and that was, 3-4 years ago at this point, it didn't have HDMI 2.1 of any kind. So you could send that one in for a hardware board replacement that gave it the single HDMI 2.1 input and the 2 HDMI 2.1 outputs. So that was a hardware change, but that was because originally X8500H didn't have any HDMI 2.1. So that became the X8500HA, and then it was the same case for the Marantz AV8805 processor. That's their pre-pro with the same capabilities. That became the AV8805A. So once you had the boards built in, then you still needed the SPK618 because it was the same boards as was in the original 2020 models. It was, across the line. So yes, this now works with all of those models, and you can use just this switcher, no SPK618.
Yeah, and it has switches on the side. The box does. The switcher does. Yeah. Switches on the side that let you turn on and off HDMI CEC control, or specifically for Denon and Marantz receivers, AVR control that will remap the media player and game buttons in addition to the 8K button on the receiver's remote control to switch inputs on the switch, the HDMI switch, rather than the receiver's built-in ports. If you do things this way, you can no longer use the media player and game ports on the receiver itself. So, whatever.
Yeah, it was a confusing thing because some people are like, okay, I don't want to control this separately. I want to be able to control it with my AV receiver's remote, the one I already have. Can I just set it up so that I press an input button on my remote as it already is, and that automatically gets this new device to switch? So yes, there is a way, but you have to go in there, into the menu, say that the media and game, and as the 8K port that was already set this way, now all go to the single HDMI 2.1 port that's built into the AV receiver itself. Then you flick this little switch on the side of the 3 in 1 out switcher to AVR control, and now when you press media player or game or 8K as the input button, it will switch the actual outboard switch instead of your built-in ports on the AV receiver, but you lose the use of those built-in ports. So your other option is to just use the switch externally. That gives you 2 additional inputs that way. And it does come with a teeny tiny little infrared remote. Very complicated. There are 3 buttons on it, 1, 2, and 3. Guess what those do? So yeah, I mean, that you can either just use separately, or of course, if you have a universal remote of any kind, it can learn those commands.
Right. So there's like, I think 4, it ends up being 4 ways to control it. You can control it by, maybe 3 ways. 4, I don't know.
3.
AVR, you can control it by IR from the remote.
Yes.
You can control it by your AVR. If you switch that switch, you control it by HDMI CC. And then there's also a port on the back that's like I think it's a 2.5, but it might be a 3.5 millimeter IR input on the back.
Oh,
that you
right.
can use
Yeah,
to
it's just
integrate it into your hub-based system. So rather than having a flasher,
IR control, it's
that's
just
still
now you've moved the receptor for the IR to whatever you plug this into. So, for example, you can use the IR out of the AV receiver with a either 3.5 or 2.5. We can't quite tell just from the image.
Yeah, you can't see it from the image.
Mono cable, and now the command will go into the IR receptor of your AV receiver and pass that along to the switch. So that's still IR control, though.
That's still IR control, but it's just a different way of connecting it. So it's supposed to ship in October. And what do you think an HDMI 2.1 switch should cost?
Yeah,
well, like I said at the very beginning of this, I went onto Amazon and looked for similarly featured switches, right? And I could not find a 3-in, 1-out. I could find a lot of 2-in, 1-outs.
Sure.
And those cost around $40.
Okay.
They can cost more, but most of them cost around $40. And they were all touting 4K 120 and 8K 60. Now, I can't promise they could do all the rest of the stuff that this thing can do.
Right.
And also, I don't think you can use those switches with the Denon receivers. I don't think it works.
I I guess you could plug one of those switches into an SPK618.
Yes, you would have to do that.
That
right?
would work, yeah. Or if you have one of the newest ones, the ones manufactured after, what was it, May or June? Then those ones would work, but you'd have to make sure that that was one of the ones that is newer and was manufactured with the fix already built in. Yeah.
Either way, so those are about between $40 and $50.
Okay.
So this thing, of course, costs $200.
$200 dues. Yeah, it's a little steep, it seems. I mean, if you had an X8500H and then you paid to upgrade it to HA, well, that's just it. For now, nobody at the moment. Right,
yeah.
Right this second. I mean, I guess there's the $500 HD Fury.
Right.
Yeah.
Seems cheap compared to that.
I guess so.
I don't know. It's whatever. It is what it is. So this is what they've put out. I kind of feel like this was all unnecessary. They should have just put this out instead of that 1-in, 1-out thing. But
I mean, yeah, if this had been free, I would have been over the moon. That would have been above and beyond.
Well, that's the whole point.
Yes.
What would you rather your customers be like? Why am I going to pay $200 for this thing? Or I am over the moon that you gave me this thing. What gives you more customers going forward? What builds you more brand loyalty? Giving away a couple extra ports on this thing, which I know costs money. I'm not saying it's free.
Oh yeah. I mean, with all the shortages, maybe it costs more than we think it does, just in parts.
Tell you what, if they had put out a 3-in, 1-out free solution, even if it was a $100 solution or a $50 solution or whatever, for this thing, for all their stuff, they wouldn't have to put out receivers in 2021.
Well, this actually kind of raises the question for me, though, because, I mean, we've only had rumors that supposedly in October we might hear about new models. Now this throws some doubt on that for me. I'm like, maybe they're just going to stick with the 2020s, not bother to release new models right now. I mean, maybe they can't. Maybe they literally can't get the parts in enough, volume to make it worth their while. This kind of tides them over, because the 2020s were already feature rich. It's not as though they didn't have basically all the features that you're looking for. They just didn't have any HDMI 2.1 switching. I'm like, this kind of would allow them to tide them over. Then again, if they're able to make this box and sell it, then surely whatever the next AV receiver model's coming out will have at least 3 HDMI 2.1 inputs, one would hope. Either way, a little bit of speculation there. But over on Audioholics on their YouTube page, they actually had an interview with a rep from Odyssey. Because Odyssey is actually, I don't know if they're wholly owned by Sound United now or what the exact ownership situation is there, but Sound United is sticking with Odyssey. They had an interview with Phil Jones from Sound United, and then I'm forgetting his name. Jeff something. I forget his name off the top of my head. I'm trying to picture it. But from Odyssey. And Gene actually kind of got them to let slip that there is an updated version of Odyssey in the works. No announced time on when that'll come out. No announced time on how much it'll cost. But this will now be a version that runs on your laptop. That's the thing that they let slip out. So they are trying to basically compete head-to-head with the rack. That's pretty clearly what's going on there. And so that's in the works too. So I'm like, all right, you throw a switch on the existing model. Maybe you can use the new, more advanced version of Odyssey that runs off your laptop and can use a USB microphone. You add all that up, and maybe you don't need new 2021 models. Maybe that's what's going on.
We'll see. So this comes from Clara on Twitter. Clara spotted a new product from SVS at this year's CEDIA Expo. They won a CEDIA award for their 3000 series in-wall sub. I didn't even see this.
Yeah, I had missed it too. In-wall subwoofer. This would be the first SVS in-wall subwoofer. And once you hear a little bit of the description, it totally makes sense what's going on.
So they appeared to have redesigned the 3000 Micro with its dual 8-inch drivers to fit in a wall. The awards mentioned that the 800-watt amp is now external and can be used to power up to 2 of the in-wall driver units. No price was mentioned. So the biggest problems with in-wall subs usually is whether or not they have a sealed back. A lot of them don't. I would expect that this would, coming from SVS.
We don't know, but it sure feels like if you take the 3000 Micro and you just sort of extrapolate, change the dimensions so that both of those 8-inch drivers are firing forward, and then what the dimensions would need to be to keep the same internal cabinet volume. I'm like, that all adds up. That adds up really nicely to take the 3000 Micro and turn it into an in-wall sub.
Well, it says it's under $2,000, so I would expect it to be what?
Yeah.
$1,999. It's usually under 2,000 means, but with SVS, you never know.
Right.
I did hear that SVS is raising their prices. I read that today.
That would make sense, to be honest. Yeah.
With the shortages of parts and increasing labor costs and everything else,
and shipping too. Prices have gone up. So that's everything.
So if you have been on the market for an SVS now, or anything really, now is the time to buy. Don't wait. Don't wait. All right, Amazon. Amazon made some Fire TV announcements. There's a new Fire TV Stick 4K Max.
Very descriptive.
Just 4K Max. It's bigger than normal 4K. It's the maximum, I guess.
I guess this is as far as we go, because how could you go beyond the max?
This stick is it's like a 2x4. It's a very big stick. It's maximum. I know it's $55. It's shipping October 7th, which is 2 days after my birthday. If anybody wants to, send me a bike or something. It has a 40% more. It has 40% more powerful processor that seems to targeted at Amazon's Luna game streaming service, things I could care less about. And it has Wi-Fi 6 on board. Dolby Vision, Dolby Atmos, HDR10 are still supported. 10 Plus, sorry, are all still supported. A new feature is Alexa Home Theater that lets you wirelessly pair it with Echo speakers to use instead of your TV speakers, because when you really, really want bad sound, you want to be able to talk to it and tell it how bad it is. But that feature is very similar to what Apple did with the Apple TV 4K, where you could wirelessly pair it with HomePod speakers and use those instead of your TV speakers. Now, what we don't know yet is with the Apple situation. On the Apple TV 4K, the new one that came out earlier this year, last year, I can't remember anymore. But that was actually an eARC port, so you could take the audio from your television and input it into the Apple TV, which would then wirelessly send it out to HomePod speakers. I don't know if the Amazon Fire TV Stick 4K Max has that same capability, or if it will only wirelessly output audio from itself, which would make sense, honestly, if that's all it did. It looks like.
We don't know. We don't
know. It just looks like
what a name.
And they're introducing their own Amazon branded TVs. I did read about this being made for them by TCL. It's a very basic 4 series, because why rename something? If
right?
It's already named something. Just keep it. Just put the Amazon logo on the front. If we rename it, does it cost anything extra? Yes, it does. Okay, then. Just slap the Amazon thing on the front. All right, the 4 series. It's a 43, 50, and 55-inch sizes, 370, 470, and 520, respectively. They're clearly all about low price and having the Fire TV interface. So if you like that Fire TV interface and you like TCL, I suppose this is the TVs for you.
Mm-hmm.
There's the Omni series. That's 43 through 75-inch sizes, 410, 510 for 410 for 43, 510 for 50, 560 for 55, 830 for 65 inches, and 1110. Because they just couldn't knock off that $10 at the end.
Well, you know what? That might have just been 1,100, and maybe I mistyped that. I can't remember. It's around $1,100 for the 75 inch.
It's got to be 1,100. That's got to be a typo.
A 75 inch for $1,100. You know, like, you got to give some credit for that. Yep.
These get far field microphones built in with a physical off switch on the TV if you don't want them always listening. Though that off switch isn't connected to anything, so good luck. Jeff Bezos is in your brain. And the 65 and 75-inch sizes support Dolby Vision. There's no local dimming of any kind, so you know.
That's right.
Great black levels, and they're all 60 hertz panels. So the inputs are HDMI 2.0, but they do support eARC, and they start shipping October 27th. Boy, if I've ever seen a product that was more geared towards people who buy based on price, I don't know that.
And also, the first thing that shows up in the
shows
search
up on Amazon.
You type in TV, maybe the screen size you're looking for, and guess what'll show up first from now on, no matter
cheap
what
75-inch TV. Boom.
I mean, you could search for any TV specifically, and guess what's going to show up first on Amazon's page now.
Yeah.
Ah, well.
Keep the box. If you buy
They aren't targeting gamers with these, that's for darn sure.
Do not throw the box away, because you will be sending it back, I think. I mean, the
TCL TVs themselves are fine. It looks like these are actually not this year's 4 and 5 series TCLs. It looks like they're the previous years, because this year's 5 series has full array local dimming. Not a ton of zones, but it has some. So yeah, these looks like they went to a model year prior in TCL's lineup, said, hey, all the extra stock you might have had, let's just slap an Amazon logo on there instead, and take Roku out and put Amazon Fire
that
TV
TCL
in,
off the front and put an Amazon sticker over the top of that.
And clearly TCL's deal with Roku has expired, because now they're like, we got Android TVs, we got Google TVs, we got Amazon Fire TVs. They're just anybody and everybody.
You know, and I, as somebody that shops at Amazon on the regular, I do it all the time. My wife gets mad at me. Why don't you shop? I'm like, whatever. It's convenient, and you know, I got You know, I go to Target to go look at, you know, exercise shirts, because that's what I've had the same workout shirts for about 5 years now. I mean, they're literally falling apart. There's strings frayed off of them and everything else. And I'm like, okay, well, you know, I'll go to Target. So I go to Target. There's like one shirt. None of them are in my sizes, but there's one style there.
Right.
I'm like, okay, well, this stinks. I don't want to go to Walmart for just a myriad of reasons. So I end up, you know, shopping at Amazon. Now, in this case, I did end up going to an outlet mall and getting them there, because there's like 5 different stores at the outlet mall that I could find. But it's just so much more convenient to shop at Amazon, which is fine. But this is the dangers of shopping at Amazon. It's if they can absolutely guide you towards one direction and get you to buy things that maybe not be the thing you actually want to buy. Cycling stuff, for example, there's these discount brands that know how to game the system, or maybe are paid for advertising or whatever, that always show up first. And if you scroll past them and you get a little, you know, maybe even 2 pages in, maybe sometimes 3 pages in, you'll end up with the name brands, and they cost like for cycling gloves, like $2 more, maybe $5 more. And the quality is so much better, but you have to know what you're looking for. And this is what's going to happen with these TVs. These TVs are going to absolutely fly off the Amazon shelves. They absolutely are, because they're going to be, like Rob said, first thing that people see, and they're going to look at that $1,110 price. I'm never letting you live that one down.
I'm very sure it was $1,100, and I just mistyped that.
$1,110 and not $1 less. And they're going to say, that's a great TV. And they're going to get it home, and they're going to love it.
Sure.
They're going to absolutely love it. They're going to think it's the best thing in the world.
Vivid mode, Fire TV shows up there. They start talking to it starts talking to them. It's all the things you want.
That's right. Jeff Bezos starts whispering things into their ear as they fall asleep in front of the TV at night. Buy more stuff. I need a new rocket.
That's just it.
Comments from our listeners. Jason wanted to mention that ELAC has their own outlet store page now for open box and B stock items. They say all outlet store products have been inspected and performed the same as A stock, but they might have minor cosmetic blemishes. You get a limited warranty and free shipping, US only. I think that's great. People should take advantage of it.
For sure.
Nathan says, Tom mentioned that his battery backup is failing during power outages. It almost certainly just needs a battery replacement, not the entire unit. The lead acid batteries are only spec'd for a 3 to 5 year lifespan. I am aware of this. I do not like my battery backup. I never have.
Okay.
So the fact that
It's an
I know
excuse.
it is an excuse. I want an APC.
Yeah.
This is a Panamax, which is fine, but it's never been, I've never liked it. It doesn't have enough outlets. It's only got like 2 or 3, I think 2 outlets that are actually on the battery, and the rest of them aren't. So it's not as convenient as I want it to be. So there's a lot of reasons. I mean, it's fine. It's fine, but
I sure do miss that J25.
I do too. I wish I had bought one when I had the chance, but who would have known that it would go away? All right, questions. Travis. Travis has an older Denon X2000 receiver. Did I ever have an X2000? I feel like I did.
You had an X4000.
I had a 4000.
I don't
twice as
imagine you
good
would
as
have had
your-
a 2000 when you had a 4000. So no.
Yeah, anyways. Denon an X2000 receiver that he bought secondhand. He uses it to power a 2.1 setup in his main zone, plus a 2-channel setup in zone 2.
Yeah.
He was using a pair of Martin Logan Motion 2i speakers in zone 2, and one of them always sounded slightly louder than the other. He always assumed it was just the speaker's fault, but he recently upgraded to a pair of the larger Motion 4i speakers, and the right channel was still a bit louder than the left. He measured it, and it's a 2 decibel difference. Obviously, this doesn't work on zone 2, of course, but he can manually adjust the left and right channel trim levels, so it's not a big deal. He can just raise the left channel by 2 dB or lower the right channel, but it just seems odd to him that by default, there's this discrepancy regardless of which speakers are used. Does it indicate that maybe one of the amplifiers in the receiver is starting to go? I would think it would indicate that one of your speakers is placed in a way that's sucking out 2 dB of the sound, and the other one's not.
Yeah, we don't know anything about the physical setup of the speakers in this zone 2, because
that's the thing I would assume. Are you like a little bit further away from one than the other, or is there like
there's that too?
A hard wall on one side that your one speaker is bouncing off of, and then big empty space on the other? I mean, these things can all make a
like
difference.
if the right channel speaker in this zone 2 is in a corner, and then the left channel speaker is, still against the front wall, but it's completely open to its left-hand side. We would actually kind of expect, that could be as much as 3 dB.
I was going to say.
That would be expected if that were the case. So this could definitely just be a placement, because we don't know what the placement is in zone 2. Now, if these speakers are symmetrically placed, one is not closer to a boundary that the other speaker doesn't have a similar boundary close to it. They're not like literally in a shelf or a bookcase where maybe there's some acoustic properties going on. If all of that is equal and you still have this 2 decibel difference, well, I mean, it's not utterly impossible for there to have been a minor difference in the amplifiers. You did use it secondhand. We don't know. But the thing is, you've been using it all this time.
Right.
With the old speakers. It never failed on you. You're continuing to use it with the new speakers, and okay, this discrepancy is there for whatever the reason might be, but it is fixable. You can adjust the trim levels in zone 2. So I don't think this is any indication of a failing amplifier, because you've been using it this whole time. It would, if it had been failing and that were the reason, it would have failed by now. It wouldn't just continue to be consistently this way. But yeah, this could definitely be a speaker placement as the actual culprit. Like I said, the easiest one I can think of is the right speaker is closer to a corner than the left speaker.
That's what I would think too. But I mean, it literally, it could be so many things though.
Oh yeah.
I mean, there could be so many things going on in this room.
We don't know what the speaker wire situation is. We know this AV receiver is in the main zone, so we have really long speaker wires that are going over to zone 2. Maybe, like a lot of people have houses, they didn't even run the speaker wire. The speaker was already run by the previous owner, and it's like, okay, they actually used like 14 gauge copper for one, and then they used like leftover tinfoil for the other. We don't know. Who knows? It could be a multitude of reasons why this is happening. But none of them, I think, are making me suspect the amplifiers themselves are failing.
I would agree with that. I mean, and even if, like Rob said, about the speaker placement, it could be your seating as well. Right. I mean, there could be just so many. You could have the toe-in different on one than the other. I mean, there's just... I would not assume that a 2 dB, like if it was failing, you would expect it to continually get worse.
Yes.
or to just stop
Or just
working
cut
at some
out.
point.
Yeah.
Yeah, but that's not what's happening here. So I would just assume it's just a trim level and go on with your life.
Yep.
Neil says he has been tweaking his system for years to the point that he wasn't really even enjoying movies in his home theater anymore. Sounds like Rob. All nothing but sweeps. 24 hours
That's
a day, 7 days a week,
Yep.
sweeps. I got to make sure that my timbre hasn't changed. Timbre. If you had a cat, we'd name it Timbre. If you get a girlfriend, her name's got to be Timbre.
That definitely limits my selections.
I know, right? You just could find that Amber and just keep mispronouncing
That's
it.
right.
She'd be like, "Are you saying timbre?" No. By the way, my last really psycho ex-girlfriend was named Amber. So
Okay.
if she's out there listening, you nutty, you crazy. I moved because of that. But thanks in a large part to our advice about room treatments, getting dual SVS subs and positioning them correctly, Rob's 12-step guide to setting up dual subwoofers, and our recommendation to get a UMic 1, and our tutorial on how to use Room EQ Wizard, he thinks he's almost finally has results that are objectively good and flat enough that he can return to actually enjoying movies again. You, sir, have a problem. I'm going to say that right now. You should just stop and listen to a movie or watch a movie. His room is enclosed, doors in the two rear corners, with the left and right side walls pitched inward, top floor, left and right side walls pitched inward.
Yep.
He's on the top floor, partially into an A-frame section of the roof. It's this way pitched in.
Yep.
It's top to bottom pitched in. He's put down a thick pad and carpet and has low shelves on both side walls and the back wall. He made his own bass traps out of rock wool, inserted into pillowcases that are stuffed into some of the low shelves, and he purchased a plain black GIK panel for his front wall behind the center, a couple of GIK Impression Series combo panels for the sides, and 3 GIK art panels, one for the back wall and one for each side wall. So his acoustic treatments are visible, but they look like decoration, only enhance the look of the room rather than detracting from it. Those art panels. I see them.
Yeah.
They look nice.
Oh, this room looks real nice, and this does not look like a treated room. I don't think anybody would walk in here. Maybe just on the front wall, you know, because I mean, there's speakers up there, and you might go, okay, that's clearly an audio system up on the front wall. But everything else really looks just like decoration.
The 2 panels that are the combo panels look a little like air duct returns or something like that. They look a little weird, but they don't look like panels.
They certainly don't make it look like a padded room in any way.
I do not want you to take offense, but that does not look like the world's most comfortable couch. I'm just saying that. That's just why I like the color.
Sometimes they're comfy.
Might be comfortable, might be comfy, but it doesn't look very comfy. So he's installed a 7.2.4 configuration with Ruark speakers for the main 5, plus a pair of monitor audio speakers for surround backs that he already had on hand for KEF in-ceiling speakers, handle Atmos units, and of course he has his pair of SVS PC 2000 Pro cylinder subs, one in the front left corner, one in the rear right. It's all powered by a Denon X6400H receiver. He's using the Epson 1080p projector and he hasn't installed a screen yet, so he's just projecting onto his white wall. Those will be the next upgrades, assuming he can finally feel done on the audio side. Boy, you going around it the way that nobody goes around it. Go around the way we would go around it, which is get all the speakers done first and then go, we should get a TV in here. His main source is his Apple TV 4K, and he's also put together some home automation using Apple HomeKit, Philips Hue lighting and sensors, and Elgato Eve wall plugs. He's got a routine set up so that when he walks in the room, the lights come on and all the gear starts to fire up. By the time the projector is warmed up, the lights start to dim, and it all happens without pushing a button. So he highly recommends getting into automation, especially if you're just itching for the next upgrade to add to your theater. If you can have it say, "I'm sorry, Hal, you can't watch TV yet," then that would be even better for you 2001 fans out there. So, some questions. Let's start with the bass. He's got the subs and speakers all positioned, and then he ran Odyssey. After running Odyssey, he measured the results with his UMic 1 and Room EQ Wizard. When he initially saw that his bass response across all 3 seats wasn't uniform, he dug into Rob's 12-step guide. It took some time, but with the SVS app in hand and having Room EQ Wizard to look at while doing it, it was almost fun. So, yeah. So at the end of that process, he thinks he's achieved very linear and uniform results, but can we confirm this for you? You need us to tell you whether or not you have a straight line? I can do that for you.
And a straight line that is a straight line across all 3 seats. He's showing the graph. This is from the main seat that we see first, then the seat to, I think, the left, and then the seat to the right. And I mean, okay, there's a tiny little squiggle in the seat to the right that doesn't exist in the other two, but that's looking pretty darn linear and uniform. You have definitely achieved that. Yes.
I have to scroll past all this garbage. Hold on. All right. Yes, you have a linear response. Stop it.
Yeah, we can see them overlaid, in fact, and they are right on top of each other, except for that one seat on the right that has a little dip around 60 hertz. But you know what? That's not the primary seat where you're sitting. And yeah, other than that, they all overlap each other.
Yes, I agree. So we've seen a bit of a dip right around the 100 hertz, and it seems pretty uniform. One wrinkle in all this is that he ran Odyssey first, then he did the 12-step guide, and since the results look so good, he didn't want to touch it. But should he run Odyssey again, or could he just use the parametric EQ that's built in SVS subs to boost 100 hertz a little bit? That boost won't help you.
Well, it might, because that's not a full-on null. That's not a null that's going on there. Yeah.
Which is the 100 hertz one that you're seeing? Okay, I see it. It's pretty nully. I mean, they're all going down.
Right down. It would be going way down. It would be going below what his response is at like 5 hertz. It would be lower than that if it were an actual null. So he's seeing this little bit of a dip at 100 hertz. And mainly it's when he shows like a full frequency sweep all the way from 10 hertz, it looks like, all the way up to 20 kilohertz. And uniformly, there's this bit of a dip at 100 hertz. So, okay, how far down into this rabbit hole do we want? I don't want to send him into any deeper optical. What I want to say,
it's above his 80 hertz crossover, anyways, and it's
yes.
The speakers are going to be playing up that direction anyway. So, do we care that much about this? I don't think we do. I don't think we care.
Well, I mean, that's the thing, because I do think, honestly, in his scenario, with everything that he's done and saying, okay, I've achieved this and I don't really want to mess with it and take it back to a new starting point and rebuild, can I do something fairly simple, which is I've got the SVS smartphone app. I have parametric EQ bands built into my dual subwoofers. Can I give them a little bit of a hump around 100 hertz and see if I can smooth this out of my graphs? And the answer is yes, you can.
You can do whatever you want.
Yeah, not only that, I do actually think it'll work. Tom doesn't think you should, but I would say, I mean, first of all, you can always put it back, so it is not destructive. It's as simple as putting the EQ in the subwoofers themselves back to 0, so it's easily worth a try. I actually think that this might work for this one specific issue that you're seeing, very likely not hearing, but seeing, and it's bothering you, so I think that is a perfectly fine way to go. Do I want to mention at all, like, the full bore? Because, I mean, he was asking, should he rerun Odyssey again after it? I mean, okay, the theoretical way that you would come at this, I don't really want you to do this because it isn't necessary, but with that caveat mentioned.
I was thinking about the same thing, that, he kind of did it was it bass backward or whatever they say?
I mean, a little bit, except he ended up with good results, and that's what matters. That's what matters. But if you were doing this the theoretical way, what you would want to do is no EQ of any kind applied. There's no EQ built into the subs, no EQ applied by Odyssey. You're just starting fresh. You start with just the two subwoofers playing together in mono, and you do the full 12-step guide, which in your case, you already know what you need to do. You had to set one of them, the subwoofers, you set its phase to 45 degrees, and the other one you left at 0. So there's really not very much for you to do at all. But you start with that. You know that delivers uniform results. You know you already are going to have uniform results if you do that across, because that's what he did to get here. So you're going to have those uniform results. Then you run Odyssey. Now, the thing is, right now, because you made that phase switch, we don't know if maybe that's slightly responsible for that little 100 hertz dip, because that 100 hertz dip is in the crossover region. Right. So Odyssey did something back when you didn't have the phase shift applied it was trying to give you linear response, including the crossover between speakers and subwoofers. We don't know if adding that phase, that 45-degree phase shift, might be responsible for that 100 hertz. The idea is that you do all of the subwoofer uniformity setup first, then you run Odyssey afterward. If you're still seeing something, then you can go back and apply the subwoofer EQ. You might end up at exactly the same spot as you are now, essentially, which is why I don't really want you specifically to do all this, but theoretically that is the step-by-step approach you would take.
You could use the Odyssey editor app to save your current Odyssey settings, and then
if he ran Odyssey in the app, we don't actually know. You have to run it in the app.
He was doing everything else in the SVS app. I would assume that he would be doing that.
Well, we can't make that assumption for sure, but yes, if you did run it in the app, then yes, you can save what you have right now, then run it a second time, and you can save and load in between the two of them. But I mean, truly what I think will end up happening is that you probably end up with the exact same setup steps that you did. It's just you're doing them in a slightly different order, and you very well still might need to use a little bit of EQ built into the subwoofers themselves at the end result. But that's the steps. You do the subwoofer uniformity first, then run Odyssey, then double check the results at the end.
I think if he goes back and starts this whole process over again, that he won't have that 100 hertz. I think that's an Odyssey artifact that will go away.
It could be.
That's what I think. Yeah. What I think is it doesn't matter what we say, he's going to do it again anyways.
That could be too.
I think that's going to happen. Since he am I even reading this? I guess I do. Since he ran Odyssey first, set his speaker trim levels. Then he double checked the results with Room EQ Wizard. But since his UMIC 1 was calibrated for a 90-degree response, is it still accurate for ceiling speakers? How do we go about calibrating our Atmos speakers? Do we still look for them to measure at 75 dB? Because he wound up setting his ceiling speakers to 77 and his surround backs to 76. He prefers that he can notice them just a tiny bit more that way. And when they're all set to 75, they seem to get lost amidst the other sounds. What's our take? Well, I mean, in theory, you should be setting them to everything to 75. The fact that you have bumped them up, who cares? You knock yourself out.
I mean, you bumped them up for the very reason that we would say it's perfectly fine to manually adjust your trim levels afterward, which is some people, they just want to notice their surrounds, their surround backs, their overheads. They want to notice them just a little bit more, and that is completely fine. And
I agree.
I mean, what Odyssey is trying to do when it's running is go right to THX reference level spec, which says that all of these speakers at your primary listening position, if they all played the same signal, they'd all arrive at your ears at the same time at the exact same volume. And if you look at the same
reason why people prefer DTS too, right?
Sure.
You know, back in the day, people prefer DTS. Why? Because it set the subwoofers a little bit hot. People were excited about subwoofers, and they're doing the same thing now.
And now it's setting the overhead speakers hot in the DTS X and DTS Neural X, and some people prefer that. So, absolutely fine what you did. No reason to change that if that's what you prefer. And it doesn't indicate that Odyssey or any of your other calibration initially did anything wrong whatsoever. It just means you have a preference to notice your surround backs and your overhead a little bit more. You're talking about a 1 and a 2 decibel increase. This is barely anything, and that is completely fine for you to have done that manually afterwards.
So he's finding that he never listens with the volume set to 0 dB. That would be full reference volume, correct?
It would.
That is correct. It's just too loud, and it can feel a bit painful to his ears. The absolute highest he ever goes is maybe -5 dB, and typically it's more like -10, -15. Mm-hmm. So should he recalibrate the trim levels, lower them so that 0 dB on the master volume ends up being his preferred listening level? Would there be any benefit to doing that? Or aside from that, should he try setting Odyssey reference level offset to something else? Is there something we would recommend? Yeah, I recommend you not touch this. Like, not even a little bit. I think you leave it alone. So you'll go on the forums, people are like, well, you can't hear full reference volume in those speakers from that distance. And Rob and I will sit here and say, you're never listening to full reference volume because it's
not. I mean, some people do, but not very many people do.
Not very many.
IMAX levels. There aren't that many THX certified theaters anymore, but those are some of the few. Most commercial movie theaters, certainly all the ones in my area, they're not playing at THX reference level anymore. I can definitely tell, except for IMAX. IMAX demands it, and they do. They are that loud, and it can be painfully loud. I agree.
But the thing is that you are listening at lower volume levels for a lot of reasons. Sometimes it's because the content that you're listening to is not mixed to reference volume, which is mostly the case.
Definitely.
It is already way hotter than reference volume, so therefore you have to turn it down. If you
and some of it, like almost everything from Disney these days, is lower. Disney is putting everything out 10 decibels quieter because everybody kept saying at full volume this is too loud. So for the home releases, they lowered it, which I don't like that they did. Because now if I actually want to get back to true reference volume, I got to put it at plus 10, which just feels wrong, although it's perfectly fine to do when the signal itself originally is 10 decibels quieter. But yeah, I mean, what you have to... The little shift that needs to take place in your mind is you're thinking reference level is like some kind of this is where I should be, but that's not where I prefer to listen. So do I manually change my trim level so that when I set it to reference level, it's where I prefer it to be? No, because now you don't know what reference level is anymore. It's perfectly fine for you to say, okay, I know what reference level is. It's when my volume dial's at 0 dB, but that's just too darn loud for me. So I like it to be 5, 10, 15 decibels quieter. But you know exactly how much quieter it is. That's completely fine, but I would not touch your trim levels. Definitely not.
You can see this on Disney Plus, too. When you look at the different apps, like YouTube, my volume levels are between minus 35 and minus 25, okay? Depending on the content creator. Because some of them cannot figure out how to compress their audio so you can actually hear them on like computer speakers. And then something like Netflix will be in the minus 15 range, depending on the movie. And Hulu and Disney Plus, and it's been a recent development. Like Hulu wasn't like this, not that like last year.
But now it's all Disney. So,
but now it's all Disney, and now it's all like I'm up at minus 7,
sure,
which is like higher than I play Blu-rays.
But it isn't really because the signal itself is quieter. That's why you had to do that,
and that's why we were bumping it up. But I know that reference volume is still reference volume, so I still never hit, like the highest I've ever gotten something is Thor Ragnarok, because it has no bass, and I was trying to get to the bass, and I had it up at minus 2.5. That was like the loudest I've ever played anything in my home theater.
But it's 10 decibels too quiet, and the bass isn't there. It has very little dynamic range, so all sorts of reasons. The signal itself was not right. In reality, when you did that, you weren't actually close to THX reference level. You were still like 12.5 decibels quieter than THX reference level because THX reference level is so loud. But he did also ask about the Odyssey reference level offset. And is there anything else we would recommend? And this is exactly what I wanted to get to, because that Odyssey reference level offset only applies to when you have Odyssey dynamic EQ set to on. And we recommend having Odyssey dynamic EQ set to on. And especially
in a dedicated theater like this one.
Well, and especially for a person like this who pretty much never has the volume dial at 0 dB. Because what Odyssey dynamic EQ does is when your master volume dial is set to 0 dB, you are at full reference volume, and Odyssey dynamic EQ is doing precisely nothing. But when you turn the master volume down, it starts to mostly increase the volume of the bass a little bit. It's applying like a curve, and that curve gets steeper and steeper the lower and lower you turn master volume. And that's simply because our human hearing, if you turned everything down by 15 decibels, you'd still hear the mid-range and the treble just fine, but a lot of the bass would literally become inaudible. It is 15 decibels quieter, just like everything else, but our human hearing is not linear. It doesn't perceive it that way. Some of that bass will become silent to our human ears, and it's not supposed to. You're still supposed to hear it. So that's exactly what Odyssey Dynamic EQ is there to do. It's to make sure everything remains audible. You turn the master volume dial down, but you still get to hear everything, and it has to apply a curve, mostly in the bass and some of it in the surround channels and overhead channels where our hearing isn't as acute as what's in front of us, and it does that properly according to curves of equal loudness, keeping things audible when you turn the master volume dial down. If you change the reference level offset, what you're telling your receiver is 0 dB is no longer reference. Now -5 or -10 or -15 is reference level. That's what you're instructing it to do, which means that when you have the master volume turned down to -5 or -10 or -15, whatever you've set it, it is doing nothing at that point. It's no longer saying you got to get all the way up to 0 before I do nothing. Now it's saying at 5, 10, or 15 below reference, I do nothing depending on the setting, and I only start to increase the bass once you go even lower than that. Now, that makes a lot of sense there's a ton of music content, especially, that's mastered to a much louder listening level than THX reference level for movies. It's mastered where the peaks are up to like 120 decibels instead of 105. And that's where it would make sense to use the reference level offset if that's what you mostly use, is stuff that's mastered way too loud, and therefore at even minus 15, the bass is just way too loud. But by and large, turn dynamic EQ on, don't touch the Odyssey reference level offset. Everything you're doing is as it should be, and you don't really have to touch anything.
Yeah. He provided the measurements of his 7 floor-level speakers at his main seating position. Now, we're going to show you, if you're on YouTube, Rob's going to show you a bunch of graphs. Yep. For those of you that are not on YouTube, they are full frequency graphs, which means that the subwoofers are included, so the bottom half of the graphs all look exactly the same.
And this is all at the main seat. This is all from one seat.
It's all at the main seat. And if you look at it, it's plus or minus 1.5 dB, pretty much from the top to the bottom of these bad boys.
Left,
no matter
right,
what speaker,
center, surround. I mean, there's a tiny little bit extra squiggle in the surrounds, maybe, versus the front, left, right, and center, but really nothing to write home about. The surround backs look like flat lines.
Like, imagine that you're trying to draw a straight line slowly in a moving car. That's what this would look like. Not a car that's going over a bunch of bumps, just like a moving car. There's a moving car on the highway that's not in a bunch of bumps, and you're just trying to get. That's what it kind of looks like. So he says, looking at those, can he get an AVRant stamp of approval that he is hearing things the way he is supposed to hear them? Because what he's finding now is that he's often critical of soundtracks. Some sound great, for example, Jurassic Park, but others don't live up to what he was expecting. So when a certain soundtrack doesn't sound up to snuff, can he feel confident it's because of the soundtrack itself and not because of his speakers and setup? Is his system just, quote, telling it like it is, unquote, or is there more work yet to be done before he can feel that way and finally get back to just enjoying what he's listening to? Yes. You can stop it.
You have our stamp of approval.
Yes, 100%.
For sure.
Not only that, going back to that 100 hertz little bump that you're sitting there fixated on, I think that you could go back and make that absolute, like if you could, say Rob's right and you can just boost it up with the subwoofers and everything's flat. You're afterwards going to go, sounds exactly the same. Yeah. That's what you're going to experience. You're going to experience you having done a bunch of stuff and worried about it for
real
nothing.
Content, like
with real content, you're never going to hear it.
Maybe if you were playing a sweep that's like targeted, it only goes from 350 hertz down to 75 or something, and you're just playing it over and over and over again, and you're like watching the graph while it's happening. You're like, I swear I can hear the 2 or 3 decibel dip at 100 hertz.
You're not hearing it. You're not hearing it.
Probably not, but in real content, you're never gonna notice it. Never ever.
If you watch Thor Ragnarok and you say it has no bass, it's not because your subwoofers are broken or that your frequency response is wrong. It's because Thor Ragnarok has no bass.
That is
so
it.
This is definitely where you are. You can stop playing with it. You can walk away, and you can get yourself a screen and stop messing around with this stuff.
But this is the pro and the con of going to this level of calibration and objectively measuring it and knowing that your system is telling it like it is. The pro is you feel confident when you hear something. You're like, God, that just doesn't sound good. You know it's not your system's fault. You know it's the recording's fault, and it absolutely can be the recording's fault. There's a gazillion recordings out there with errors, or they just aren't very good, whole stop. But the downside is if I just want to sit back and relax and enjoy everything I listen to, well, this is not providing any sort of cover for a bad recording. The bad recording's going to sound bad, and that's the way it is. And unfortunately, sometimes it's like your favorite recording that you remember as a kid and you used to love it, and you have that nostalgic memory of it, and now you play it back on this very accurate system, like, it doesn't sound like I remember
people love vinyl.
Emotionally.
That's why people love vinyl and esoteric speakers, because they're like, oh, I've got these old Kenwood speakers that my dad used to use, and I replaced the surrounds on the woofers, and I hooked it up to my record player, and man, it sounds great. I'm like, no, it doesn't. It sounds like crap, but it sounds like crap that you're nostalgic for, and that's fine. Okay, you can love it. I have no problems with you loving what you own and what you're listening to. I have problems when you tell me that it is objectively better than other things.
Or this
which
is how
are,
it's supposed to sound.
Yeah, that's how it's supposed to sound. No, okay? And you can say, oh, I love the warmth of vinyl. Whatever. That vinyl isn't warm. It's not warm. It's distorted, and that's fine. So, yes, you have a very, very accurate system. And like Rob says, this has happened to me too. Hey, if you listen, like me, when I'm driving around, I'm listening to Spotify or I'm listening to Pandora in my car, I'm loving every moment of it. I never once, I'm not thinking about the sound quality. Sometimes I am, but usually I'm thinking about, driving and, talking with other people or maybe singing the song and having a good time. And I get home and you play Pandora through my system, like, ooh, that's not so good. That doesn't sound so great. How come everything sounds like that? Well, it's because you're suddenly, playing them through a very accurate loudspeaker system that's been well calibrated, and that's where you are. So yes, you can step away from this and feel
start
confident.
Enjoying again, hopefully.
Well, I mean, yes, and this is really, to me, the danger of getting too much into the calibration side of it with, honestly, and I'm not insulting you, whoever you are, your name is too far up for me to scroll up and see what it is. But for all of you out there that get into calibration, you start looking at these graphs and you put your nose on them.
Right.
You literally put your nose on them and say, I can see a variation here. It is not a perfectly straight line. And you don't have and I'm not saying that I'm much better than you. I just have more experience than you do. But, it's easy to get sucked into looking at these graphs and thinking if it's not perfect, it's wrong. And I don't want wrong. Well, there's wrong and there's you can't hear it. So,
it's why I rely on sweeps. I rely on my ear to tell me, and very often when I measure it, it's much worse than what my ears thought it was, but I'm like, according to my ears, sounds linear to me, and I'm fine with that.
Good enough. So, and I know good enough is not what people want to hear, but if you can sit there with a sweep and not hear it go wildly over the place, then you're fine. Dave is trying to understand how various digital signal levels are supposed to translate into calibrated sound pressure levels. Well, this doesn't sound like a technical question at all. He has an Onkyo 676 receiver, which does not display relative volume, where most of the numbers are negative. Instead, it only displays absolute volume with a scale that goes from 0 to 99. He read somewhere that 82 would be equal to THX reference volume. So that would be 0 dB for the last question. But it isn't explicitly stated anywhere in the Onkyo manual. Yes, I have dealt with this before, and that is 82 sounds right to me. It's right around that area. Usually.
Yeah, because they usually have about 18 decibels of headroom, so you're right in that range. Yeah.
So that would not be surprised there. So using his SPL meter, he went to the speaker level settings in the user menu, and he kept increasing the master volume until he was seeing 75 dB on his SPL meter with the pink noise playing. He wound up with the master volume at 88. But then he started reading online about dBFS.
Yes. Decibels full scale.
Right. And it seems as though everybody just does their own thing. Some places say a pink noise test should play back at negative 30 dB FS. Others say minus 20 or minus 12. The most consistent levels he found were for THX reference volume, and that's how he arrived at targeting 75 dB on the SPL meter. But then when he went to listen to real-world content, that didn't seem to translate. When he measured streaming music, having the master volume at 88 was way too loud. He had to turn it down to 70 on his SPL meter to read 85 dB. Streaming video apps came out pretty close. We just talked about this.
We just did. That's why
Streaming video apps came out pretty close to 87 on his volume. On his volume equals 85 dB, whatever. As mentioned, his Onkyo's internal peak noise measures 75 dB with the volume at 88, but playing external peak noise for a signal generator at 0 dB FS required the Onkyo's volume to be down at 68 in order to read 75, which actually sounds right as well.
Yeah.
Dave just wants to get a grip on all of this. Why is it happening? Does it even matter? In the end, should he just start playing something and then set the master volume wherever he wants that sounds pleasing? If so, what's the point to having a reference volume? Go back and listen to the last question.
Pretty much, yeah.
That is exactly what we just talked about.
This. But
so what I did when I did, so I did the same thing that you're talking about. I went to, I went on my parents' receiver. This was a long time ago, and went and set it at whatever I found online as being the reference volume.
Sure.
Whatever that volume was. Okay, so I think, so let's say it's 82 or whatever you found it to be. So I put the volume level at 82. It was ridiculously painfully loud. No one wanted to be in the room with me. So I set up my SPL meter onto a tripod and stood as far away from it as could and still being able to see the little needle, and then played the pink noise or whatever it was through it, and then saw what it read there. And then I made everything else read that too.
Right.
Essentially is what I did. So at that point, all you're doing is, and you literally can pick any volume. It's just,
you can.
You know, it's just easier and I think more accurate if you're in that 75 to 85 dB range, which is what you should be at that, right there at reference volume.
Yeah, the internal pink noise that plays from your OnCue receiver when you just go into the speaker trim level menu, that is supposed to read 75 dB at full reference volume. It is okay, we're going to get into this. It's all based on THX reference volume.
Again.
And that is its own thing. That is its own standard. They said it, at least it's a nicely laid out, easy to understand standard, and that says in THX reference volume, full scale, the full loudness from any given speaker is 105 decibels.
Right.
Reference volume, meaning the average volume across the entire movie, is supposed to be negative 20 decibels full scale under THX reference volume, which would be 85 decibels. But the pink noise is designed to play at negative 30 decibels
because
full scale.
Negative 20 is really loud.
Really loud. So it's designed to play at 75 decibels. That's what's supposed to measure on your SPL meter if your AV receiver is set to reference volume and calibrated properly. Now, we don't really know what the number on this absolute scale from 0 to 99 is truly supposed to be. It probably is something like 81, 82, 83, because it typically is. But we don't know for 100% sure. But you do have ACU EQ built into your 676. And while we would run ACU EQ and then turn it off because neither of us likes what it does as far as the actual equalization part of it goes, it is good at setting your distances and levels. And it will set your speaker trim levels so that, now you have to kind of do it backwards because it's going to set your speaker trim levels for you. And I suspect in your instance, it's actually going to set your speaker trim levels to positive numbers. That's what it sounds like. It sounds like since you had to, with the speaker trim levels left at 0, turn the master volume all the way up to 88, for your SPL meter to read 75, you'll probably have like a +5, maybe a +6 as your speaker trim levels set by ACU EQ. That's fine, because now if you go back and you get your SPL meter out again and you go back into the speaker trim levels and you turn the master volume, not the trim levels, the master volume up and down, you'll probably find that when it gets to 81, 82, 83 or something like that, now that the trim levels have been set by ACU EQ to +5 or +6, it reads 75 dB again. And now know, now you'll be able to tell it, okay, this is what reference volume actually was. You'll be able to come back and tell us. It turns out reference volume on this thing was 81, something like that. That's great. Now you know. But you just know. You just know that now THX reference volume is that setting of 81, 82, or 83 or something like that. And I would leave the speaker trim levels as set by ACU EQ. In your case, like I say, it'd probably be +5 or +6 or something like that. I'd leave all that alone. When, as we just mentioned in the previous question, when you play music, they might have mastered it to 120 instead of 105, which would easily explain exactly what you described, where like, to get this back to 85 decibels, I had to turn it down to 70 instead of 88. I'm like, there you go. It was 15, 18 decibels louder than THX reference volume, which is not surprising for music whatsoever. And when you go to Disney Plus, you might have to turn it up to 91 now instead of 81 to get it to read the same, because they're mastering everything 10 decibels quieter. So in the end, do you just ultimately set the master volume to what sounds pleasing to you? Yes, unfortunately you do. Not because THX reference volume is wrong in any way, but because not every piece of content is mastered to THX reference volume. Some of it's mastered quieter, some of it's mastered louder.
Yeah, and that's I know it's confusing, and I know you feel like you should be able to turn it to one volume and leave it at that one volume. It's just not the way it works. I mean,
for most movies it works, because most movies are mastered to THX reference volume, but we have this whole huge library from Disney now that isn't, so that's unfortunate. And then music definitely probably isn't.
Right. So as theater... My voice is changing. I'm finally becoming a man.
That's right.
So his theater area is about 13 by 23 by 8, but it's an open living room, not an enclosed space, which explains why his Onkyo is going to be goosing speakers
It's
a little
a
bit.
big space that he's
It's a
dealing
big
with.
space.
Yeah.
Yeah. Which makes sense, which sounds
Sure.
right. So his speakers are Polk RTI A7 towers, A6 center, and A3 surrounds with dual HSU subwoofers in diagonally opposite corners, probably of his listening space.
Of the theater area, not the entire open space, I would imagine. Yeah.
Yeah, his seating distance from his center speaker is about 8 feet. He likes to listen at loud playback volume, so he got a bit concerned when he started reading about THX systems and THX reference volume, how it can require gobs of wattage. He wanted to be sure his system can hit those playback levels, and that led to all of this confusion. He started looking into very efficient speakers like Klipsch, but is that necessary in his case? Clearly not.
Indeed. Like I said, you very well might, after running Accu EQ, see that your speakers are set to +5 or +6.
Yeah.
That would be entirely expected in this instance,
Yes.
but you haven't reached the maximum. If you reach the maximum
If you see
of what the...
+10 or +12 on
Yeah.
there, that means that your speakers cannot get loud enough for how
That's
far
right.
away they are for me.
Yeah.
If you're not seeing that, they're hitting full reference volume from your seating distance. That's all you
That's
really
right.
have to do. Is
Yeah.
just look at the trim levels afterwards.
Yeah, I mean, certainly, like, let's say he switched from Polk to Klipsch, then and ran Accu EQ again. Now your trim levels set by Accu EQ will probably be down at 0 or maybe even negative numbers because they are considerably more efficient. But that doesn't mean that you have changed the capability. I mean, I guess ultimately, if he switched from Polk to Klipsch, he would have more headroom available, right? Like he could go past THX reference volume with the Klipsches, likely, and be okay with that. But I mean, he was targeting 85 dB, and for a lot of his content, he was down below reference volume to get that. I mean, that's going to remain the same. In your setup, and I mean, it's particularly because you're only about 8 feet away from your center, right? In the size of room that you had, if you were sitting much farther away, might be a different scenario. But you're sitting pretty close to your front speakers. Everything is working out fine, and you don't have to buy new speakers. So you're very okay.
Yeah, this is a solution for a problem that doesn't really exist. You're like, you read about a problem that other people have or that you might have, and then you've decided that, not you've decided, but you're wondering if you need to find a solution to that problem.
Like an episode or two ago, we talked about Kef's demo system. That's a 9,500 cubic foot space, and they've got 3 rows of seats, and the first row of seats is like 15, 16 feet away from the screen. That's a different scenario. That's where you get into these gobs of wattage with normal sensitivity speakers. Because yes, every time you double the distance, all of a sudden you need 4 times as many watts. It's like this is, or at least 2 times as many watts. But I mean, this is what's going on in those scenarios. So yes, all of a sudden that can be exponential growth in how many watts you need as you're sitting farther away. But because you're sitting quite close, things have worked out for you.
Karl is building a new detached garage, and he's considered using the second story of that garage as a completely blacked out dedicated theater. It isn't going to be huge, but he knows his preferred seating distance, and he knows the field of view and that he and his wife prefer, which happens to be very large. So he worked out that a 130-inch 16:9 screen would be ideal for what he wants. He's strongly considering one of the brand new JVC laser projector models, and he's trying to determine the minimum length that this theater room could be. The shorter the better. Could either the JVC NZ7 or NZ8 create a 130-inch image from 13.5 feet away? Get thee to projectorcentral.com for the calculator. And while Rob tells you about it, I'm getting more coffee because I'm under-caffeinated.
All right. And so the straight answer is no. You cannot put the lens of an NZ. Some of us have to say it both ways for that letter. I'll say Z for now on because Karl, I'm pretty sure, is American. So, you can't put the lens of an NZ7 or an NZ8 13.5 feet away from the screen and create a 130-inch image. It just cannot do it. That does not fall within its zoom range. If we do go over to Projector Central and look at again, I'll bring this up. The JVC projectors are natively not 16:9 aspect ratio because they have the 4096 by 2160 pixel resolution instead of 3840 by 2160. 3840 by 2160 is 16:9. 4096 by 2160 is closer to 17:9 or like 1.9 to 1 instead of 1.78 to 1. So it is a bit wider. So you do have to make sure you set the aspect ratio correctly to 16:9 in the projector calculator. Then you set your diagonal diagonal image size to 130 inches and lock that in, and then you get to see the whole range. And then you will notice that an NZ7 or an NX7 or an NZ8 or an NX5, they all use the same lens and have the same distances. Has to be at least 14 feet 1 inch away. That's the minimum distance. So that's the most you can do. If we actually went to the $25,000 NZ9, it has a slightly shorter throw, ever so slightly shorter. But even that one, to get 130 inches, it has to be 13 feet 7 inches away, not 13 feet 6 inches away. It have to be 1 inch further away, and you have to pay $25,000 for that 6-inch difference. So, yeah, there you go. But that is the answer. You can't do it from 13.5 feet.
So either build a bigger room,
right?
Or make a smaller screen and sit closer. Those
are the two options. We do have to keep in mind, I mentioned it's the lens distance, the front of the lens to the screen. So you have to keep in mind the JVC projectors, the NZ7, the NZ8, they're about 20 inches from front to back. So there's an extra 20 inches behind the distance you just calculated. And then
plus
in the manual,
HDMI cable too. You gotta worry
in
about
the
that
manual,
connector.
JVC says they want you to have 8 inches of air behind the back of the projector. So you got to add 28 inches to the distance that you've calculated on Projector Central in their throw distance calculator. You got to add 28 inches to that. In the case of the NZ9, if you pay the $25,000, you got to add 29 inches because it's an inch deeper than the NZ7 or the NZ8. So bottom line, you put all that together and your room needs to be 16.5 feet long. You want a room that's 16.5 feet long for all of this to just fit and still create a 130-inch image.
Yeah, that screen better be on the front wall too. If you guys are hearing
That's right.
it sounds like people talking, you probably aren't, but my microphone might be picking it up because my wife's on Zoom and she talks as if they need to.
Okay.
She actually needs to be loud enough to get it all the way to wherever those people are. She does not whisper or keep it quiet. Anyways, I apologize if you hear that in the background. That's my wife talking to her boss. So if the room above the garage cannot be made 17 feet long, are there any projectors that would match JVC's image quality but be able to cast 130 inches from a closer distance? Would it make more sense to decrease the screen size to, say, 120 inches? It would 100% make sense to decrease the screen size. I mean, that's what I would do. If you
Yes, because the simple answer is if you're trying to equal the JVC image quality with a shorter throw, like I don't have any good option for you.
No, I don't think so.
The JVCs are kind of standalone in how good their black levels and especially their intra-scene contrast, the black and white on the screen at the same time.
Get an OLED and sit real close to it.
You sit real close. But if you just went to 120 inches instead of 130 inches, then all of a sudden your projector can be lens to screen 13 feet away. And now the room could be 15.5 feet long instead of 16.5 feet long. You've saved an entire foot by going down to the 120-inch screen size and sitting a foot closer, not even a foot closer, 8 inches closer, give you the same field of view as far as I'm aware. So, yeah, there you go.
All right. So just a bit of fun. Karl enjoys a podcast called The Sporkful. They always talk about something food related. They recently had an episode about scenes in movies where the characters are eating and why actors never actually eat in movies. So what are our favorite scenes from a movie with a character eating? And did the actors actually eat on screen, or were there clever cuts and edits so that the actors didn't have to actually eat over and over, take after take, and the person in charge of the continuity didn't have to pull their hair out? Karl's favorite in the last scene of Big Night, which I'm not familiar with that movie.
I haven't seen that yet.
Where breakfast is being made for the staff. And his wife's favorite scene is Tita's magical meal from Like Water for Chocolate. I did see that movie, but I do not remember it.
Okay.
What are ours?
You can think on that.
I will say that Drew Barrymore eating people in that stupid TV show.
Okay.
What is it called? The Santa Clarita diet.
Yeah. There you go.
Yeah, where she plays a zombie.
Nice.
I don't know that. I mean, it looks like she's eating stuff. I'm sure there's some clever edits going on, but I would go with that.
Okay. I don't know why this was the first one that popped to mind for me, but my favorite one is the movie Suburbicon, and it's Matt Damon eating the peanut butter and jelly sandwich and drinking the glass of milk towards the end of the movie, and he is most definitely genuinely eating on screen. There was no faking that because it's a single take. There's no cut, and he is definitely eating that sandwich and drinking that milk on screen. I don't know how many takes they did, but that is for sure.
I'm trying to think of any Quentin Tarantino movies that would have had food in them, because he definitely would not have had takes. He doesn't want to cut, so that would be there too. I kind of, because of the whole Weinstein thing, I have a hard time. I haven't finished. I started the Hateful Eight or whatever, and then didn't finish it, so I went back to start it again, and because I kind of forgot how it went, and I saw the Weinstein Company shut up, and I was like, oh god, I gotta turn it off. But whatever. So I've seen just about everything else he's done, except for that one about L.A. something L.A.
Once Upon a Time in Hollywood. Are we talking about?
Yeah, that's the one. Yes. Okay. Yeah, I just pressed something on my computer. Okay. There's a show on Netflix called Movie Room Remake. Some of them are pretty crazy, but several are also difficult and downright sad to watch. Movie Room Remake. Okay. One guy paid $30,000, ended up with an all-white room, 0 acoustic treatments, every surface was flat and hard, and a center and surround seemingly in the ceiling. It's concerning to him that this is what Netflix viewers might be seeing as their introduction to home theater, and thinking this is how it's supposed to look. No acoustic whatever. Whatever. And sound engineers were involved. Where are the actual home theater experts? Have you ever seen HGTV?
Right.
I mean, every single TV they mount is either way too high or just flat out above a fireplace, and not a single one of those things is plugged into anything, period. They mount it on the wall.
There's no cords hanging anywhere, yeah.
There's no cords anywhere. There's no outlets anywhere. There's no place for stuff to run. It's all like complete garbage. And people look at that like, I want a clean-looking TV like that too.
Right.
No, you don't.
Well, I mean, forget a produced television show with a budget. I mean, go on YouTube with channels that do nothing but talk about home theater and installing home theaters, and a whole bunch of them never have an acoustic treatment anywhere in sight.
No.
So even that, it can be kind of disheartening to see. So, I mean, why they don't hire home theater experts to actually be part of these shows. One, I don't think the producers know that such people even exist to begin with. They know they're interior decorators, and that's what they're going with, is interior decorators. It has nothing to do with home theater experts. I think that's what's going on.
I worked with an interior decorator for when we redid our kitchen, and she was great. I mean, she had some great ideas, but she sat there and with a straight face told me the light on the fan was going to be enough for my entire kitchen, and I almost slapped her in her face. Yeah. I'm like, I would like if I could put the surface of the sun, that brightness in my kitchen, that's how bright I want it to be. It cannot be bright enough, and I've got lights everywhere, and I still think it could have used more. Could have used more lights in here. So yes, interior designers are all about things looking good and looking right, and having the right aesthetic and feng shui or whatever the heck it is that those people are selling you. But they are not experts in everything. So yes, I agree. A lot of these shows, a lot of these people, and not only that, you are also dealing with clients, especially on a lot of these shows. You're dealing with clients, and the client says, I don't want black acoustic treatments all over my home theater, and they're like, great. I don't want to see any speakers. Great. We can't install them on the front wall though, because that's a cinder block wall. So is it okay if we install them in the ceiling? I don't care. I just don't want to see them.
That's right.
That's what you get. So there's a lot of things going on there. Don't just blame the installer. A lot of times it's more than that. John in the Philippines, he says, after all the effort he went to make sure that his Stormtrooper helmet was in every picture, including a graph of his frequency response, that ended up being the week Tom was away and Lee, that ended up being the week that I was away and Lee guest co-host. So let's make sure Tom gets to appreciate these picks. Yep. Oh, look at that little Star Wars guy.
That's what it is. It's not actually the helmet, because it's just it's a little Stormtrooper figure. So he wanted to make sure you got to appreciate that.
It's not my favorite graph in the entire world. Boy, we can fix that. All right. So we talked about the JVC's new NZ series laser projectors and did a bit of a comparison to the NX series last week. His two main takeaways were lasers instead of lamps, and the lasers will last longer, but the NZ series costs more. So in terms of final picture quality that ends up on the screen, do we think the NZ series is well worth the extra cash? On picture alone, they should be better. I believe.
Yeah,
I mean, the contrast is, the contrast is a little bit better,
it's the same.
And the layers, is it the same? I thought they were slightly better.
No, the contrast is the same. They're a bit brighter. They should be a bit brighter. Right. But the contrast figures, anyway, that was spec'd, ends up being the same. They should natively, by the specs, have a little bit wider color to begin with. And then one thing that the JVC reps did mention on the webinars was that because they're already starting with slightly wider color natively, then if you have the NZ8 or the NZ9, and you use the DCI P3 color filter, that color filter now reduces the light output by about 20% instead of by about 25%, as was the case with the NX models, because it's already starting a bit wider, so they don't have to filter quite as much to get all the way to 100% DCI P3. So you're starting a bit brighter to begin with, and then you're losing a little bit less to that color filter if you're going all the way up to the NZ8 or NZ9 models. So there's small improvements there, but I mean, the E-shift versus the E-shift X versus no E-shift. I mean, I don't expect that to make a big difference. In fact, I would probably end up turning it off for most things so that I can have 1-to-1 pixel mapping for 4K content. So, I mean, to me, like, it's what I said last week. If I already owned an NX5 or an NX7, I would not upgrade right away. Me, personally. I wouldn't upgrade right away. Maybe once my lamp is dimming and it's time to upgrade anyway, and it's 2 or 3 years from now, and hopefully prices have come down a bit, I'd consider it then, but I'm not seeing enough to compel me to upgrade right away. And then his next question is what I would say next anyway, so.
All right, here we go. Yeah. So his current projector is a BenQ HT3550, and his screen is 120-inch Elite Screens matte white that he views from 10 feet away. He absolutely loves the picture quality, especially HDR as played by his Panasonic UB820 player. If he were to upgrade to either a JVC NX5 or the NZ7, would he notice a big improvement? Is genuine 4K resolution going to be a big step up from the pixel-shifted 4K, he asks, is that the same as E-shift, of his BenQ?
So to answer the E-shift thing first, that's just JVC's branded name of, and it's not exactly the same because one is a single chip DLP and the JVC is a 3-chip liquid crystal on silicon, or they call that DILA. So it's not literally the same, but it's the same idea of using the same pixels multiple times per frame to deliver to your eye a higher contrast than the native resolution of the panel themselves. So in the case of his BenQ HT3550, it is a native 1080p panel, and then that is being used 4 times per frame to deliver the same number of pixels as genuine 4K to your eye. It's just not able to do it literally all at once. So I mean, the resolution to me is the least important thing here. Having genuine 4K pixels matters not at all, in my opinion, versus having the shifted 4K pixels of the BenQ. But would I expect you to see a noticeable and worthwhile difference going from a BenQ HT3550 to either an NX5 or an NZ7? Yes, I definitely would. Yeah. That is a big change in contrast, black levels, color purity, color width, because the HT3550 is very accurate at Rec. 709, but really can't go beyond that. So there's lots of very noticeable changes that I think you would see, but resolution wouldn't be one of them.
Right. Sorry. He's owned his BenQ for 2 years, but he's only put about 300 or 400 hours on it. So would he be fine with the less expensive NX5, or should he jump straight to the laser NZ7, or should he just stick with his BenQ?
I mean, if he's got the money, I think an NX5 makes sense in his case.
Yeah. I mean, but
does he spend almost twice as much to go to an NZ7?
I don't think so. I don't think so. I mean, if he's had it for 2 years and he's put 300 to 400 hours on it.
Uh-huh.
It's not like he needs the laser light engine so that he
exactly
doesn't run out of bulb.
Right. And a 120-inch screen is not so large that the slightly less lumens from the NX5 is going to be any sort of problem versus the slightly more lumens from the NZ7. So putting it all together, I think an NX5 makes sense in his case. I mean, this is all if you have the money. We're still talking $5,500 here for the NX5. This is not chump change. You know, the HT3550 is a, what is it, $1,500, $2,000 projector? We're a completely different price class here. Yeah. If you have the money, you will see a difference. I'm very confident in telling you that. Right. So this is not that you're paying all this money and getting nothing in return. This is not, you know, if you kept your HD 3550, you're missing absolutely nothing. But if you're going to have to stretch to afford this, you know, it's a bit tough. But I think if you purchased it, you would not have regrets like of the type saying, gosh, I don't see any difference versus what I already had. I think you would see a difference.
Yeah. It's just so hard. I mean, I don't know. There's a big part of me that wants to say, you haven't used your projector enough that you need to buy another projector. Right. You've used it so little that you need to use it more before, and with only 300 to 400 hours on it, and it's already a pretty decent projector. I mean, it's not like you're getting a bad picture. No. It's not like you're over there with one of those $200, Amazon special laser projectors, LED projectors, or whatever that claims a bajillion lumens and it really doesn't have any of those things. You've got a good setup here. Every day that you wait, the prices on the NXs are going to go down. Maybe. Essentially is what it was. In theory, I will say
stuff is going up.
I will say there's a lot of price increases out there right now, so maybe not. But in theory, it should, as the NZs come out, the NXs should become less expensive to a certain extent. So, I wouldn't wait. I would keep my eye on it. I'll put it to you that way. I would especially.
If you see a nice sale, the NX5 gets down under $5,000 or something like that.
Yeah. Just kind of set yourself sort of a limit and just keep an eye on it. And I don't. Does JVC have a B stock store like Epson does? Epson sells B stock every once in a while. Yeah. So look for authorized resellers and stuff like that, and see what you can keep your eye on. That's what I would do.
Okay.
I mean, that's just me. So what's our opinion on the expensive processors like Trinnov and Storm Audio compared to the likes of flagship Denon models or something of that sort that sits in between price-wise like Anthem? Are the price differences really worth it? Would if you have the sort of $1,000 per pair speakers that we talked about a couple of episodes ago, like the SVS Ultras, for example, will a Trinnov make those sound way better than the flagship Denon? I don't think it's about sounding better.
Yeah, it's not that kind of difference. No.
The difference that you're getting when you get like something like a Trinnov is the ability to. It's like just more configurations and more power. And by power, I mean being able to deal with more complex installations. So when you with Denon and these essentially one box solutions, sometimes they're two boxes, but one box solution where everything's in one box that does all the things, you are limited to where you can place all your speakers. You're limited to how many speakers you have. You're limited to how many channels you can run. You're limited to how you can calibrate things. Whereas something like a Trinnov, you have a ton of basically the sky's the limit. You can
32 or 48 speakers. You simply can't do that on anything else.
Right. I think that's what you're paying for more than anything, and that's why we don't recommend them here very often, because in a normal sized room, and even what we would consider like a great room or these oversized rooms that some people have, you don't have the ability or the desire to be able to place that many speakers that precisely around your theater area without having a very large 30-40 seat theater
Yeah.
That,
and I mean, some people out there do, and that's when these things make sense, and it's great that they exist. I got no problem with that. But yeah, you've got to be going beyond 9.1.6 before it really, from a feature standpoint, makes sense. Yeah. I mean, the whole discussion of, I put this in my system and it made everything sound so much better. I mean, there's two sides of that. One, there's just the pure marketing of this thing costs more, so it has to sound better, not just have more features, it has to perform better. And there's that whole side of it, which I don't buy into whatsoever. There are the differences in the room correction programs. Trinnov has their own, Trinnov Optimizer. Anthem has their own, Anthem room correction. Then you've got Odyssey going on in Denon. Storm Audio, I'm not sure. I think they're Dirac. I think that's what they're using there. So, I mean, those can make audible differences, particularly if all you ever do is go with their default target curves, and that is like 80-90% in my estimation of what so many people on the forums have talked about. Like, I switched from this to this and I love the difference that it made, so therefore this room correction system is better. If you actually dig into what any of those systems can do, if you take the time to manually tailor the target curves, they can all end up very, very similar. And of course, there's the whole matter of what is actually happening in the room first, and then what the EQ is able to do on top of your room's acoustics. Because, of course, all the marketing talks about have any room you want. Have the completely white. Every surface in this room is hard and flat and reflective, but we've got room correction. It'll fix everything. None of them, not even the Trinnov Optimizer, can do that. They are all once the sound leaves the speakers, you're at the mercy of your room. There's only so much you can do electrically before that point to change the outcome after the sound leaves the speakers. So all of them can sound very, very similar. By default, there might be audible differences because they have different target curves from one another. Right. But that doesn't mean the capability is inherently different. So,
especially when they're all using fur filters, they're all using they may have deeper levels or more filters within their processor, or more ability for you to tailor it to your own desire. Right. But in the end, it's like,
what they all can do is not magic.
Yes, it's all the same stuff. They're just doing it slightly differently.
If you've got the system you're not increasing the number of speakers you have beyond what your current Denon, let's say, can do, and you're thinking, I'm just going to switch from that to a Trinnov, and it's magically going to make everything I have sound better. I mean, like I say, by default, maybe there's an audible difference just because of the target curves, but in terms of what could be achieved, no, it's not that kind of difference.
Yeah, and like Rob said at the very beginning here, there's a psychological component to this. Definitely. Where you spend not only the money for the Trinnov or whatever it is, but also all the amplifiers and everything else, and you've done all this work and now you're sitting down.
The cables,
and you're listening to it for the first time, in a really long time, and really paying attention, and you're like, "Oh my god, it sounds so much better." Does it though, or is that just your? And
it's not easy to A/B switch at that point back to what it used to be.
I mean, and like I said, even taking the target curve, even if you absolutely calibrate it to yourself, and it was you're trying to get the flattest thing, and you could look at your little graph, and your little graph is slightly flatter than it was before, and all these other things. I think audibly you would end up with something that if you could A/B it, you couldn't pick it out. And
that's like Joe and Tell over on YouTube, which actually, hi Joe, because I know he listens to the podcast. He left a comment on some of our YouTube videos. But I mean, he was saying, because he's tested around, he's like, yeah, I tend to prefer Dirac. But then he actually did the whole thing where he measured the end results with RoomEQ Wizard, and he went through using the Odyssey editor app compared to the Dirac editor, on his laptop. And he's like, he set them both to the same target curve and then measured with RoomEQ Wizard afterwards. He's like, yeah, these graphs overlap. Even this one little weird squiggle that I thought one of them would fix, which has got to be like a room anomaly. He's like, yeah, it shows up in both of them. It's surprise, surprise, when they're both targeting the exact same thing, the graphs pretty much end up overlapping, and the speakers don't sound that different anymore. What a shock. But it was. I'm so glad he put that video up there, because he was one of the people saying, yeah, I tend to prefer Dirac. And look, I have no problem with someone who says, I just want to save time, and I like the default target, and I don't want to mess with anything, so I prefer it for that reason. Perfect. It's wonderful. Fine. That is excellent.
The problem is when people when people try to convince other people that this one's the best and therefore they should spend extra money on it. I'm like, okay, if you're talking ACU EQ versus literally anything else, I'm on board with that, right? But if you're trying to tell me Wipeout is significantly better than Odyssey or Trinov's whatever is significantly better than Drac, I'm gonna have a problem there because I really think they're essentially the same.
Could be done at least.
Yeah. Will. So it's been a while since we've heard from Will. He's got his basement theater that is L-shaped. The main listening area is 26 feet long by 11 feet wide. The front right is open to the small leg of the L. So there you go. It's got a projection screen, a whole bunch of posters, a little it looks like a little refrigerator area in the back there or something. I don't know what's going on back there. It looks like a safe. What is this, a hotel? Anyways, he was using 4 subs spread out around the room, but they were all smaller budget subwoofers, and none of them really play below 28 hertz. So during SVS's Labor Day sale, he decided to get his first true subwoofer, a PB1000 Pro. We talk about multiple subwoofers all the time, but 99% of the time, he's the only one in this theater, so he really only cares about that one seat that he sits in. He's open to buying another at PB1000 Pro at some point, if it will make a tremendous difference. He had a okay. But if one sub can do the trick for his one seat, that'll be fine. Just as a starting point, he put the PB1000 Pro at the front of the room, below his screen, just to the right of his center speaker. Upon very first listen, he didn't notice an improvement, and that was a little disappointing, but he knows there are more steps to take to get it all correct, and that's what he's hoping we can help him with. There are 6 spots in the room where the PB1000 Pro could live, so should he just do a subwoofer crawl? I cannot believe you're asking that question.
Well,
I'm going to be honest, but it seems as though online the subwoofer crawl has fallen out of favor with people saying that it doesn't work and you shouldn't do it. I know we're online, but I don't feel like we're online.
Well, you know our audience is very small compared to the number of people out there and other shows that
stop reading Reddit.
Many thousands more people looking at their videos and listening to their podcasts.
He does have a U-Mic 1, to be honest. He hasn't dug into Room EQ Wizard, and he's hoping it's possible to get things sounding good without going through the learning curve. I don't blame you, dude. He normally listens with the master volume at -25 to -20, so he's tried playing a couple of bass sweeps from YouTube at that volume and even had a look at a RTA, a real-time analyzer, on his phone while he was doing so, but he wasn't really hearing anything below 80 hertz, and the RTA was moving around too much to be really useful. So does the master volume need to be at a certain setting while the sweeps are playing? Should all the other speakers be physically unplugged while he's playing bass sweeps? And then once it's all done, if he listens at his preferred -20 or to -25 volume setting, will he even hear the stuff below 28 hertz that his old sub wasn't playing? He liked this to be as easy and quick as possible, so we're able to just look at his photos and say, here, put your sub here. He's happy to do that. What did we say? I say subwoofer crawl, number 1.
Yes!
So
you are in the perfect scenario for where a subwoofer crawl does help. I will agree in saying it doesn't necessarily get you the very best possible results. No other things being considered. It is not, and there's confusion about this, it is not a good method, the subwoofer crawl, for setting up more than one subwoofer. It only is useful for one subwoofer, but you have the ideal scenario to use it, which is you have 6, you have a finite number of places where the subwoofer can realistically live. It's not going to be literally anywhere around the perimeter of your room. It is these 6 spots where it might go, and you are just trying to determine which of those 6 finite places is the least bad out of all those places. And that is exactly what the subwoofer crawl can help you do.
You don't need to unplug all your speakers. Just go to YouTube or audiocheck.net, however you want to do it. Find a bass sweep that does like 100 or 150 hertz and then down
to 20.
Because it doesn't really matter. The rest of it, the speakers are going to cut out anyway, so it doesn't really matter.
I would sort of encourage you to use the one on audiocheck.net because YouTube is so heavily compressed that I don't really trust that sweep is linear. Like, the signal that they uploaded to YouTube might have been linear, but YouTube compresses so much of the video and audio that I don't trust what's coming out from YouTube is actually linear.
It should be fine. I mean,
it should be, but I don't trust
the audio compression when it comes to that sort of stuff should be compressing,
Mostly the highs.
harmonics, the
Yeah.
highs and the really highs and the really lows. And if it's only
But I mean,
one
audiocheck.net
tone,
is right there. It's so easy, and that definitely is coming out linear. So I prefer to just say that because I feel safe about that. What you can actually do if you don't want to worry about any of the sound is coming out of my speakers and the crossover is having any impact on this whatsoever, is you can just load an audiocheck.net sweep onto your phone and then plug a, whatever it is, you might have to, if you got an iPhone, it might be like lightning to 3.5 millimeter adapter and then plug in a 3.5 millimeter to RCA adapter cable.
Yeah.
But, you can do that and just play the sweep straight off your phone, straight into the sub. Like the sub isn't connected to the receiver at all, just straight into the sub and play it that way. You do, if you're doing it by ear, need to play it loud. You do need to play it loud, because if you're playing the sweep at minus 25 dB, go back to the first two questions that we talked about in this episode, and there is that whole thing where your hearing is not linear. You not hearing 20 hertz when you're 25 decibels below reference volume is not surprising. Your ears are just not going to pick that up. It's too quiet. So when he's saying, okay, I normally listen at minus 20 or minus 25, am I even going to hear anything below 28 hertz ever? If you have dynamic EQ on, you will. Yeah, that's exactly what we're talking about.
You won't necessarily hear that if you have the volume too low on the sub while you are playing these sweeps. If you're playing it directly from your phones, that's why you need to have it up pretty loud.
Yep. I mean, if you're doing it by ear, you kind of do need the sweep playing at 85 if you're trying to listen for linearity, because your hearing is most linear at 85 decibels. That's why THX chose that as reference volume. It's where your human hearing is most linear. So you do need to play that sweep nice and loud if you're doing it by ear. But what you're listening for when doing the subwoofer crawl is, so you've got the subwoofer now, the PB1000 Pro, you're going to put it where your primary seat goes. If it's too much to lift it up into the seat, then move the seat out of the way and put the subwoofer where that seat would normally be. You go to each of the 6 locations in your room, and you're not necessarily trying to find one spot where it's like truly linear, like it sounds exactly the same volume throughout the entire sweep. It's possible none of them will deliver that. But what you will hear this, you will notice this as you go from to those 6 spots. Some of them, the sound of that sweep in terms of volume is like a roller coaster. And some of them, you'll probably find one where at some point in the sweep, it's like silent, which means it's a full null at that position. And those are the ones to avoid. Avoid one where there's a full null or it's a complete roller coaster. Hopefully, you'll find 1 or 2 spots in the room where maybe it's not perfect. It doesn't sound perfectly even in volume, but the ups and downs are mild, because then EQ can fix that.
Yeah, if you go around to your 6 spots and you're like, oh, I don't like any of these all that much, go back to the subwoofer, or if the Pro's got the app.
Yeah.
And just change the phase by like 45 degrees.
Yeah.
Change the phase by 45 degrees and go to all 6 of those spots again. Change it by another 45. Change it by another 45. Just to give you a general gist of how the phase setting will make a difference here. 85 dB. I mean, you can measure it, and you should measure it to when it puts out a test tone. You can just do a subwoofer test tone to come out of this thing to calibrate it to 85 dB, or you can just turn it up to the point where you're like, this sucks, and then that's probably around 85 dB. Honestly,
we've talked so long, this might end up being our last question.
It might be. No, we're not. We still got
20 minutes left, but this is a long question.
Wait, Jonathan, you mean?
Yep.
Okay. All right. So let's go on to Jonathan here. Jonathan in the soon-to-be SeaDen 4.0 theater. After the horrible flood, the biblical in nature flood, Jonathan endured from Hurricane Ida, 4 feet of water in the basement, 8 inches of water in the theater.
Ugh.
The SeaDen is being rebuilt bigger and better than ever. Since it's basically being rebuilt from the ground up, they're taking the opportunity to expand the size a bit by moving one of the side walls, and that means the entire layout can be rearranged, with the room now being longer than it is wide and 2 rows of recliners. He's provided the plan. Let's look at this thing here. Mm-hmm. So which way is the screen? There it is. Okay.
The screen is on the left in the diagram. He's got about 9 feet from the screen to his first primary row of seats. Got 2-foot 10-inch walkway on either sides of three recliners going across there, almost a 3-foot walkway on either side. Second row of seats is 6.5 feet behind the first row, and that leaves him about 5 feet behind the second row.
Right. He's got a bar and a couple bar stools back there.
Yeah.
Looks like he's got Atmos speakers set up for top front, top rears.
Yep.
His surrounds are in the back corners.
That's going to be one of the questions, so we'll delve into that.
Yeah, he's got a 77-inch TV up front and two 42-inch TVs flanking the corners.
That's
so
right.
across the corners, sub in the front right, sub in the front left.
Rear left.
Rear left. Sorry, you're right.
Opposite.
And then he's got the main speakers there, and there's no talk of a center, but I'm sure it's there someplace.
Yeah, under the TV. It's a 77-inch OLED, so center's under the TV.
So with the wall move, the theater now be 21 by 14. That gives him enough width to mount all three of his TVs on the 14-foot wall and sitting 9 feet away from the main TV in the middle, which will be 77-inch OLED. He can now have a second row 6.5 feet behind the first row, leaving about 5 feet of space behind the second row. Rob always saw this. He's penciled in a table and bar stools to create a small third row. So what do we think of the layout? Seems like it all fits nicely, but do we see any problems that jump out? I don't like where your surround speakers are placed.
That's going to be one of the questions, but other than that, in terms of where the seats are, I do think 5 feet behind that second row, you might not truly have enough room for the bar table and bar stools. It might be a bit...
You'd have to get a very thin one, which is fine if they're just going to sit there and have drinks or a little bit of popcorn or something like that.
Yeah.
But yes, you will definitely want something high, thin, and you can tuck the bar stools underneath it.
That's right. It might be a bit squishier than you think, but that is clearly not the priority in here. Yeah. So that's about the only thing, though. Yeah.
So the ceiling is being redone too, and since there's a bedroom directly above, he'd like to improve the soundproofing if possible. He isn't knowledgeable about construction, so can we explain in layman terms what can be done to the ceiling? Is it just a certain type of insulation?
No, not that simple. You do want to insulate in all the joist bays,
yes.
And it can be normal insulation. It doesn't have to be soundproof insulation. There's effectively no actual difference in performance. So regular insulation up there in the joist bays. The main thing, because it's a contractor who's doing this work for him, he's not doing it himself. Resilient channel. You do want resilient channel when you're talking about trying to improve the soundproofing, because what you want to do is not have the ceiling drywall directly screwed or nailed into the ceiling joists. That means anytime the drywall vibrates from the sound inside of your theater, it is going to transmit that mechanical vibration into the joists. Resilient channel and ceilings, I feel more confident about using resilient channel because usually there's a little bit more care done, and your ceiling needs to be leveled anyway. They almost always put shims or strapping across the ceiling joists to level the ceiling before attaching the drywall anyway. So instead of those, resilient channels take care of that. So most contractors installing ceilings are familiar doing it with a resilient channel. Now, the insulation above, resilient channel holding the drywall instead of screwing the drywall directly to the joists, that is probably enough. That is much more soundproofing than regular construction. If that is still not enough, if you're finding that you really want to do it, then you need to do 2 layers of drywall. Yeah. Which gets a bit challenging. You can talk to your contractor about that and exactly how much soundproofing you want. But the main things are insulate the joist bays and resilient channel to detach the drywall from the joists.
Yeah, and you remember he's doing in-ceiling speakers too, so you're going to have to worry about that.
Yeah.
If you do all this, you're going to need backer boxes that are insulated and everything else. So, and also, I mean, you can consider green goo or green glue. Glue, right?
It's glue.
Green glue in between the 2 layers.
In between the 2 layers of drywall. Yes.
Yeah. He'd like to expand from the old 5.2.2 configuration to 5.2.4. He's drawn circles for the proposed Atmos speaker placement. If those look correct, the ceiling will be just under 8 feet high. I do not hate where your speakers are. I would cheat them all about 1.5 feet towards the front of the room, so that the back row, they are just kind of above their head. And then the front row is a little bit further in front of you.
Yeah, I think the front ones need to be a little bit further because we don't know exactly what the angles are now, but that looks considerably less than a 45-degree angle from the top fronts to even the front row of speakers. I'm assuming that these chairs, where the chairs are right now, are fully reclined. Yeah, it looks like
because of so I just feel like the front ones are a little bit too. I kind of want to make them a little bit more even, but the reason. I guess it really doesn't matter functionally for the rear seats. You could leave the rear ones where they are.
Yeah.
It's going to end up boosting the volume if you calibrate for the front middle seat, which is what I think you're going to do.
Right.
Moving them forward means that the calibration would go down slightly, but it's still functionally going to be the same volume for the second row of seats.
I mean, the simple answer is, with the slightly lowered ceiling that you have, take your main seat, go 4.5 feet in front of where your head's going to be in the main seat, and 4.5 feet behind. Well, I guess you're probably going to go a little bit farther behind than that, because the back row is 6.5 feet behind you. So I agree with Tom. You're probably going to have the top rears basically directly above the rear seats, pretty close to it, maybe ever so slightly behind them, just to make that a little bit nice. But then about 4.5 feet in front of your head in that primary seat in the front row, and put the top fronts there. Yeah.
So the second row of seats is not going to get super good Atmos panning. That's why I'm saying just kind of cheat them as far forward as you can and still have them slightly behind the person's ear, if that's possible. And the Barstool people, that sucks to be them. He owns a pair of Polk MC60 in-ceiling speakers. Should he just get another pair, or should he get different in-ceiling speakers? His floor-level speakers are all Ascend and Wavecrest, which were designed by Ascend. I mean, you know how we feel about in-ceiling speakers, right? For Atmos, which is...
Whatever you were going to spend on potentially new speakers, make sure you got backer boxes for...
That's the most important part.
Yeah, that really is the most important part. Now, if you want the speakers that I always love recommending to work with Ascend speakers, it would be Sonance. Over at Best Buy, right now, the Mag 6s, which are my favorite ones there, they're all the way up at full price, which is like $600 a pair. They go on sale all the time for like $250 a pair, so just wait for that. The Mag 8s are on sale right now for $300 a pair instead of $900 a pair. So that's the type of price reduction. It happens all the time. So just keep an eye on Best Buy. And the Mag 6s and the Mag 8s, they do have optional backer boxes, and they're only like $50 for a pair. So definitely get the backer boxes. You could go with the Sonance. I like recommending those, but the Polks are fine. You get another pair of those. Just make sure you got backer boxes.
So he's drawn the surround speakers in the rear corners because what is now the left wall with the sliding barn door actually wasn't damaged by the flood, so it is not in the plans to open up that wall. And speaker wire was already run to that wall in the back corner for his old setup. But is that poor placement? Could I say yes strongly enough? Should the surrounds basically go in between the two rows of seats? How would he move the speaker wire to for the left surround if it would be better to do so? Okay, so there's a lot of ways to move that speaker wire. You could use crown molding to hide it as it goes around. You could put it along the floor. The barn door indicates that probably won't be the case.
Right.
But I would like two sets of surround speakers, one for each row of seats.
That'd be kind of nice. Yeah, ever so slightly behind the front row, ever so slightly behind the back row.
Again, this will put your back row surround speaker and the back row Atmos speakers a little bit closer together than I would like. But
you do have the height difference. That's okay.
It'll be fine. So I would do both. I would have both, two pairs of surround speakers wired in parallel. No,
in series.
Parallel.
Yeah,
series.
In series.
Whatever. The one that halves the ohms and not doubles them.
Right, series. I wouldn't actually worry about removing the existing wire to that back corner. I'm not super concerned about like removing it and repositioning it. You could just run new speaker wire to the positions where you want to have your either one pair or two pairs of surround speakers.
He's redoing the ceiling, right? So the ceiling's going to be open on some level, so just run it across the ceiling until you get to that part of the wall and then fish it down.
Your contractor can definitely fish a single wire down an existing sidewall, which is not... even if it's load bearing, a contractor can definitely do that, especially when the ceiling is going to be open. So I don't foresee that as a big problem at all. Just figure out where you want to have your either one or two pairs of side surround speakers, mark those, and let your contractor do that work.
So his dual rhythmic subs were ruined by the 8 inches of floodwater in the theater. They shall be replaced, but he's thinking dual SVS PC2000 Pro cylinder subs will actually be easier to fit in the room. Do we agree with that choice? Absolutely.
Yes, I do. I like it a lot.
They will absolutely. You will be disappointed how low the volume dial will be on the back of those subs. So Just be prepared for that. But other than that, they will crush this room. You will be fine.
And they fit very nicely. And they come with the anti-vibration feet, so the sound path isolation feet already installed, which will help a bit with the soundproofing considerations for the room above.
So he's buying new theater recliners, and they're also sending him plans for the second row riser. Anything he should look out for in those plans. It needs to be overbuilt.
Yeah, we want inert. If they're sending you plans and they're saying, hey, this will vibrate with the bass and make it really fun and rumbly in those seats.
Even if they don't say that, if they're like, oh, we're going to put holes in it so that air can pass through or whatever, and then we'll fill it with insulation. Or even if they don't say that, they're just like, this is a normal riser and it's just going to sit there on the ground. Just look at it really closely and just, if it's like 24 on center or even 16 on center.
And I would look for cross bracing. I want cross bracing. I want that frame to be as close to inert as we can make it. So that's really, it doesn't have to be complicated at all. Just all the perimeter and the stringers, if they all go to the ground and they're all cross braced, that's all you need. That's as much as you need to do. You could take, if they don't include those things, you can modify the plans very simply. Usually, it's just adding cross bracing and making sure all the stringers go to the ground.
Right. And so just overbuilt is the way to look at that, just as inert as humanly possible. Rafael's theater area is roughly 16 feet from front to back and 19 feet wide, but the left side is completely open to the dining room. Infinity feet. He currently has no room treatments, and the floor is stained concrete, which I do like. Not so good for acoustics. The only somewhat absorptive items are his Valencia seats and a couple of dog beds and the dogs. The ceiling is old school popcorn finish, which does nothing.
Yeah.
I guess it's slightly diffusion, but let's not.
18 kilohertz?
Yeah, let's not oversell that.
It's not an acoustic treatment. Let's not sell it that way. Yeah.
His speaker setup includes the Denon X3700H powering all Polk RTI series speakers. With a Polk DSW Pro 660 sub at the front 400 watt 12-inch 25 hertz extension. Mm-hmm. Probably pretty optimistically. And the SVS PB1000 Pro at the back. He mostly uses it for TV and movies, but maybe 20% for music. He started out with just a pair of Polk towers that he got for a song, and then he built from there. But now he's thinking like an upgrade, and they just don't sound as crisp and clear as he would like. Yeah, I don't know if that's the speaker's problem.
Indeed.
He's considering KEF-Q series or ELAC Unify, but he still likes Polk as a brand, and they have the more expensive Reserve and Legend series. He's on board with using bookshelf speakers up front instead of towers, which makes sense in this size of room. What are our thoughts? It isn't easy for him to demo speakers in this area, but he's fine with buying and returning any suggestions. I suggest you add some room treatments to your room.
Yeah, yeah.
When I just recently published an article over AV Gadgets that's all about speaker shopping, and the first thing I talk about is there is no point speaker shopping if you have not done something with your room. Now, I'm not saying that you have to do all the stuff that it
doesn't have to be a full dedicated theater level of acoustic treatment. But in this case in particular, he's got, I don't like to say the word is not to make you feel bad, but you have a bad acoustic environment in terms of a listening room. When it sounds like everything is pretty hard and reflective in here, and you really don't have anything soft and absorptive in this room, then blaming... here's the thing. Do I think there are objectively better speakers than Polk RTI series? Yes, I do, but I think the acoustics in this room are to such a degree that is still your limiting factor here. I don't think upgrading your speakers is going to give you anywhere near the level of improvement that you're hoping it will. Whatever money you were going to take and spend on new speakers, I would spend on trying to do something to acoustically address this room. Now, we had the great examples of what Neil did earlier, where printed panels, getting the Impression series that has, a nice pattern on the front of it. Things like you can get the suede panels from Acoustimac. You can do all sorts of things, different shapes, different colors, printing images on it, having the wood panels on front to put patterns on it, like all things that make it look like decoration as opposed to acoustic treatments. But that needs to be done. I'm thinking in the way that he described the room, he's probably sitting pretty close to the back wall. I don't know for that for sure, but it sounds like he might be. You really need treatment behind your head. If you're thinking, God, the dialogue in here doesn't sound very clear and easy to understand. It's like, yeah, that's not a surprise, but I'm not going to blame the speakers on this one. So
right.
The suggestion is it's not what he wants to hear. He wants to go speaker shopping. I just don't think you're going to get the value for money when this is the room that you're putting them in. Your room is the limiting factor much more than the speakers. So
this is the case where, and I've said this before, but it needs to be said again here. The reason that why we treat the room first is because my computer's going to die.
Okay.
I forgot to plug it in. The reason that we treat the room first is so that we can actually hear the difference between the speakers. And once you treat the room, you may find that your speakers are suddenly new to you and sound better. And you no longer feel the need to upgrade your speakers. You might, but you might not. I got to grab my power cord or we're not going to make it.
Okay. Yeah, so complete agreement there. It's difficult because... we don't want to rain on anybody's parade, and if someone had a nicely acoustically treated environment and was saying, I feel like it's time for a speaker upgrade, I'm not going to say you have the greatest speakers in the world, that there is no way to upgrade them. But yeah, I'm only repeating myself at this point, but we'll have links to all the articles that Tom has written over at avgadgets.com that, we try to go through this and we're willing to explain it multiple times because it is where the bang for the buck is. If you're not going to notice the money that you laid out on new equipment, then really what is the point? So actually, if we go back to that episode that I did with Lee when Tom was away, so you can go back and look for that episode, we go through a whole bunch of visual examples. You want to check out the YouTube version of it, or at least look at the Flickr album that went along with that episode, because a whole bunch of visual examples of acoustically treating rooms without it necessarily looking like acoustic treatment. So there's a ton of great examples in there that you can look at and go, oh, that might be something that works in my room without changing the aesthetics of what I've set up.
Right.
Or enhancing them.
And I mean, even this episode has the room that has the printed panels on it and all that stuff. You probably already mentioned that.
I did.
And it's many moons ago we had somebody who bought Rob's speakers and then blasted us for Rob's speakers sounding bad. And we were like, okay, so tell us about your room. And he told us, whoever this person was, about their room, and it was like, of course you didn't hear anything. Your room's garbage, and you're sitting in the wrong spot. All these things had to be addressed before. You cannot just you can't upgrade speakers and get better sound. You sometimes will never experience that better sound until you do other things, and that might be where you sit, that might be placement, and it's often just room treatment. So don't spend money on new speakers. Instead, spend time and money figuring out how to treat your room as much as you can. Now, like Rob said, we're not expecting you to turn your theater into this area of your house, which is not a dedicated theater, into some sort of black box, bass traps, floor to ceiling, all this other stuff. We're not expecting that. But if you want to shop for speakers, you have to do this first, or all you're doing is buying new speakers and putting them into a bad room where they are not going to be able to shine. So let's figure out what your room actually sounds like, what your speakers actually sound like. Then when you start shopping, because he had some ideas of what he wanted to shop for, then once you start shopping, you can actually hear the difference between the two of these speakers, and that's what you want to do.
Let's make it worthwhile.
All right. Rob, who do we got left?
We have Fred, which is quite a lengthy question. So yeah, unfortunately, we won't get to that one. I thought we would get some more questions. We will have to not prattle on quite so much next week. Infinite Gary, Dazz, Bertrand, and John.
Been a while.
They are
all right,
on the
you guys.
list.
We will see you next week. We want to thank our listeners of the week. We want to thank Mike and Jonathan for going to avrant.com and clicking on the Buy Us a Cup of Coffee link and sending us a PayPal donation, as well as our 133 patrons over at patreon.com, including Rafael and Bertrand.
Yes, indeed. Mike and Jonathan, thank you both very much for the PayPal donations. And over at patreon.com/AVRant podcast is where you can sign up for an automatic monthly donation. Big thanks to our 133 patrons, Rafael and Bertrand. Thank you for being two of them.
Thank Infinite Gary for sending us a digital copy code for the movie Elysium, as well as notes of gratitude from Dave, Dazz, Jonathan, Rafael, Fred, and Bertrand.
That's right. Infinite Gary, thanks very much for that digital copy code. Maybe I'll use that one. I think Tom said he already has that movie. So there you go. That could work out. Dave, Dazz, Jonathan, Raphael, Fred, and Bertrand, thank you all very much for the notes of gratitude to us for keeping the podcast going. Those notes of encouragement are definitely appreciated. And a big thank you to everybody who continues to listen and send in your questions.
For AVRant, I'm Tom Antry.
And I'm Rob H. Now stay in and listen to something.
Want your question answered? Send it to question@avrant.com. This is AVRant.
Now go out and listen to something.